Disclaimer, trigger warning. This episode contains sensitive discussions about suicide and mental health. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to a mental health professional or someone you trust. You're listening to What's on Your Mind, a journey from the mind to the mic. And I am Joyeeta Biswas, your host for today. Brought to you by the Psychology Department of NMIMS, we create a safe space for honest and meaning conversations about mental health.
There is a huge burden also of suicide among housewives, even among daily wage workers, and in fact, even student suicides have been on the rise. Dr. Lodha is a certified trainer in suicide prevention and crisis intervention. Today, she is here with us to share her insights and knowledge on suicide prevention and help us understand psychological first aid and empathy and how one conversation can help prevent suicide. So, first of all, I'd like to start you off with a myth which is related with suicide in general, and that is that if you talk a lot about suicide, it is more likely to happen. So, what is your take on that? I think this is one of the most common myths that people harbor. That if we think about something, especially suicide, we may act upon those thoughts. However, contrarily, the fact holds that the more we talk about, more we prompt people about having thoughts or feelings of suicide, they actually get an anchor to talk about it, to express what's on their mind. Because this is something which is more in connection to another fact about suicide, that when people think about suicide or ending their lives, it's most often because they are in pain. They want to end the pain, they want to end the suffering, and not really their lives. But when one is more helpless and more tired, we usually find no supporting people around or maybe not enough resources to get help. That's when we end up feeling more suicidal and think more on the lines of that, it's maybe just better to finish or put an end to my life, because the idea is to put an end to the cycle, right? So coming back, the more we talk about suicide, it actually helps people to talk about their distress more, rather than actually then pushing towards acting upon the thought or the feeling. Usually it does help. Like the more you talk about suicide, the more likely they're going to express their feelings. And it's going to be much better for them to realize that suicide is just not the only option. So yeah, what you said was definitely really true. And this is something that we should take care of and like stop in the society and talk more about suicide. Right. And I think in addition, the most important thing that most of us are looking for is to be able to have someone who can just listen to us, who can understand us. And the fact that someone is just there to lend a ear can sometimes just be enough help for someone who is feeling distressed. When we talk about suicide, the first thing that many people think of is depression. So, from your perspective, what are some other factors in like day-to-day level that influences someone's risk to have more suicidal thoughts? If we look at research literature, we learn that 90 to 95% of individuals who report having suicidal thoughts and feelings also have and meet the status of having a depressive episode or a depressive disorder. However, that's not the only risk factor to understand if someone may be feeling suicidal or having suicidal feelings, right? However, there are many other risk factors that can increase for an individual to feel or think about suicide. In line with the record that we have from the ADSI, which is the Accidentals, Deaths and Suicides report in India, which is by the NCRB, we know that there are several other factors that increase the risk for an individual to feel suicidal or think about suicide. Some of them being financial burden, having the status of being unemployed, having the status of being a daily wage worker. In fact, what is surprising to note is also that the burden of suicide is
quite high, almost about one third to one quarters, in housewives as well. Another thing that we have been seeing for quite some years now is the increased burden of suicide among students as well. And even amongst professionals, we see that there are various professions that can increase the risk of an individual to feel suicidal or think about suicide, which most often results after having either been burnt out or maybe developing depression as well. So, having the status of a mental illness is one risk factor that increases risk for suicide, but there are several other factors such as financial burden, unemployment. Even in fact, another important factor is interpersonal distress or relationship troubles, marital discord, which have been documented enough to be one of the top three causes of increased suicide rate in India alone, right? In general, we also see some other situational factors, such as farmer suicide and any sort of individual level or interpersonal level factors. I think the important thing to understand about risk factors in suicide is to understand that any factor, any circumstance or situation that would put the individual in distress in such a way that they are unable to find resources or help to reduce their distress, the increased burden for a long period of time can increase the risk of suicide.
So the fact is that, just a counter question to you is that sometimes there are parents who say that we didn't notice. Like most of the times they say that we didn't notice. Like even though there were clear signs that they were not socializing more, and like oh he was eating less, he was sleeping more. They might have noticed such things, but they still say that we didn't notice that he might have suicidal tendencies in general. So, for such groups of people, like the parents in general, if their child is going through something, how do you think they should approach their children so that they can understand that something is wrong?
I think this is an extremely important question because time and again we see these kinds of instances happening in schools, colleges, and we sadly hear them only at home, you know. A lot of times it's also because the status of having a mental health problem, especially depression, which can sometimes be coupled with feelings of suicide, is often labeled as lazy, not having enough motivation. Or sometimes a very common thing that parents tend to say is that our times were much more difficult and we made through, and our children are provided with so much more resources, so they should be up and about. Why are they so lackadaisical? Why are they so laid back? Why are they not making the most of their resources? But something that we have to understand is that with increasing time, with digitalization, and with evolution that happens, we can't really tell, but it's very evident that the burden of mental health and mental illness has definitely increased. And it is as a function of being and living in a society that has so much of competitiveness, right? Burnout is happening a lot more quickly, resilience is a lot more shot down, the status of having stress in general has increased so much. Like, oftentimes when I remember, I gave my first written 3-hour exam when I was in sixth grade. So it still comes as a shocker to me when I hear that someone in senior KG or first grade or second grade is writing a 2-hour exam, you know. And it also then, as a psychologist, always makes me think that, wow, that means that cortisol is at play already, and it's scary. It's scary, it's not very pleasant, and it invites all of us as stakeholders and systems and societies to really be careful. That if stress is going to start at such an early age, intervention also has to start very quickly. We also have to meet now the needs of what the current times are. We can't compare what is true now to what was true like 10, 20, 30 years back also. Another thing that we very commonly talk about is that how the generation gap is reducing. Earlier we would say that, okay, 10 years, 15 years across would be the next generation. But now, with the kind of digitalization, globalization, the revolutionary changes that we're seeing on a lifestyle basis, we see that the changes are happening so quickly. Like generations seem to be different in just 5 years. Right in the way how they go about their day, to what their problems are, to how they deal with their problems as well. So I think a message that I want to leave with parents and society in general is to listen to your child no matter what it is. And time and again, instances at schools and colleges have told us that the more we've let go and not addressed or just treated as a child, saying that, oh, it's just another, complaint, or he or she is not putting in enough effort, has sadly also meant that we lost our children to suicide. And the most important aspect of suicide prevention is that we treat every sign and every message from the distressed person as important. And on the contrary, we also then tell people that it's not okay to joke about some things. The romanticization of mental health and illness has become such that we don't realize how loosely we use these terms. Feeling depressed or feeling anxious or feeling, just traumatized, right? We take away the essence of these words amongst people who actually are depressed, battling anxiety, and experiencing trauma, right? So it is the responsibility of each one of us individually to attend to people with care, sensitivity, and give them the listening ear that they need, because you really don't know who is fighting a battle that we know nothing about, right? And at the same time, also being careful that we don't use words just loosely, but and we know we are sensitive, we are careful about what we joke about and what we talk about more seriously.
So there is a concept of psychological first aid which we have been learning very gratefully in our course, and it has a great history. And I feel like it is very less talked about in our society in general, because it's a very new topic. What I think, it's a very new topic and it's still being worked on. So, building on the understanding of psychological first aid, what should friends and family do right away? And like both emotionally and medically, how should they prepare themselves in case of suicide?
I think psychological first aid is one of the most potent tools that is accessible to the community, that has existed for quite some amount of time now. But like how you said that, yes, maybe lesser people are aware of it, and maybe we don't use the term psychological first aid as much. However, I think thanks to awareness, thanks to a lot of training that has existed around the same, and it is being carried forward to many people, students, communities, also under the garb of several other names, like gatekeepers training, suicide prevention training, psychological first aid, etc., etc. Some of the things that we can learn and take from psychological first aid and help our friends or loved ones who may be feeling suicidal or maybe feeling distressed also. And I think one thing that we should remember is that if we are able to address distress firsthand and in the earlier stages, it's not going to escalate to an individual feeling about or thinking about ending their lives or harming themselves, right? And the first thing is communication. Like, time and again we keep saying that communication is key. But something that we miss out in communication largely is that we don't have the uncomfortable conversations. We don't ask the uncomfortable questions. It's very okay and very normal to just casually ask all the time that how are you? Is everything okay? And how are you doing mostly largely remains at the physical health level itself. But I think we need to go a step beyond and also ask if people are having a good day, are they going on fine, are they holding up okay? In times of distress, it's okay to just ask, how we say that it's rather than assuming, it's best that we just ask to check what the actual like status of affairs is with an individual. So the first thing is to actually ask, question them, are they okay? Are they holding out fine? Do they need help? And also clearly be able to tell someone that how is it that you can help them, right? Another aspect of the next step to just asking is to also listening non-judgmentally. Most often we don't realize, but very immediately, the moment we hear someone, the next thing we tell them is that, oh, why don't you do this? Have you done this? Have you done that? Rather than, I think, being more curious, we need to probably just attend to a person with care. So choosing care over curiosity helps us to listen to the person non-judgmentally, listen to what they really want to do. There are times when somebody may not have the resources to do something to help themselves in a situation. In other times, the person may actually want to just be heard and not really solve the problem. Sometimes the person may have probably spoken to 3-4 people who've already advised them or given them solutions what to do, and maybe that's not what they want to do, right? So sometimes I think just being there, present, engaging in active listening, where active listening is not just where I'm just passively sitting and listening to you, where half the times I'm not even paying attention or just checking my phone, but I'm with you in the moment. I give you sufficient eye contact where you know that yes, I'm with you. I maybe subtly nod my head, show with hand gestures or my posture that yes, I'm invested, I'm interested, I'm just with you as you are talking. Smaller things like, asking questions about things like, how have you been holding up? How have you handled this so far? What has helped you? How would you like me to help you? These are some helpful questions to ask rather than and in place of merely suggesting what the other person should do. So first we must show curiosity to also know that what is it that they have done already. And apart from asking questions, what we can also do is that we can actually tell them or suggest to them that, hey, help is available. A lot of times it's possible, and a very common question that comes across whenever we're talking about supporting someone who's feeling suicidal is where people say that I may not be in the right place, I may not be in the right headspace, or even in that situation immediately to help the person. So how is it that I can help, right? One thing to know is that it's okay if you cannot help, but can you help them get help? You could probably connect them to a reliable mental health professional. You could probably connect them to a reliable suicide prevention or an emotional support helpline or a chatbot that may be there where they will get help. And one of the best ways to actually do so is to first ring up, first yourself. So, we most often tell in class and, during trainings that you make the first call at the suicide prevention helpline or you coordinate with the mental health professional so that you know that, someone is going to be available. So you don't want to leave the person hanging, that they've reached out to someone only to know that nobody's picked up the call or nobody's attended to their messages or, their call for help. Because this is the most sensitive aspect about suicide that we are trying to take care of, is to address the cry for help. So these are some simple things that we can do, along with once in a while just checking on them. Not hovering over, not helicoptering, not getting too much into their space also that it makes them uncomfortable. And the best thing that we can do is to actually ask them, how would they like to be supported? How would they like to be cared for during this time? And maybe tell them that, hey, if you don't mind, I'm just going to check in on you. I'll probably leave a message or I'll probably call you if you would like. Or maybe even check with them if they would like for someone else to be put in touch with them. A family member, sibling, friend, or any caregiver who we know can immediately be there for help. So these are some important ways how we can support a loved one using the psychological first aid.
And so most of the times it's not that the solution that they seek, it's most of the times they just want somebody to hear them out. And that's something that psychological first aid has emphasized on. Like, over and over again, that you just have to sit there and listen to the person. Like there are two types of people: uh, one who are seeking solutions and one who just seek comfort. So most of the times it's the people seeking comfort. So most of the times it's the people seeking comfort, and I feel like psychological first aid should be taught around the world, and it will help a lot of institutions, a lot of people in colleges, even schools, workplaces, and these are like the, if you can keep one box of first aid for medical emergencies, you can also train somebody in psychological first aid in case of any situations like this.
You'll be happy to know, and something for all of us to know, is that the World Health Organization actually has an entire documented report on psychological first aid, which has the clearly outlined 5 steps that anyone can use to help support someone who may be feeling or thinking about suicide. So the good news is that, of course, yes, there has been a lot of training, but I think as we see that the burden of mental health is increasing, there will always be more and more need for the same. So we hope that yes, there will be proliferating trainings, workshops, and that psychological first aid will also move outside of the psychology discipline. Something that we all have to understand is health will be important wherever humans are, whether it's physical health or mental health. So yes, I agree with you, Joyeeta, that psychological first aid has to reach across disciplines for people to be able to benefit.
In 2025, the Supreme Court of India issued like 15 binding guidelines for educational institutions to reduce the risk of suicide attempts and promote student mental health. So, in your opinion, does our society do enough to support suicide survivors, or does it silence and stigmatize it over and over again?
I think as far as it comes to understanding and playing our roles in suicide prevention, we have to understand that it is everyone's business, right? No matter what times and how much information we have, stigma is something which will always be present in some layered form or the other. I do believe that the work in the area of suicide prevention has definitely been better. It has increased over the last few years. But like we say, we're all work in progress, and a lot more work still needs to be done because we're still facing the issue of treatment gap, having lesser number of mental health professionals. Another challenge also being that with the load of information that we have, which is most often called as the infodemic that we are now facing as a challenge, we also don't know how to bifurcate between reliable and unreliable information. There is too much of influx of information for people to absorb, so we don't know what's the right thing to do, right? So, looking at societal stakeholders, it is absolutely necessary that each stakeholder, each community, and each authority takes its own responsibility in ensuring that the mental health burden can be reduced as much as possible. At the societal level, it's important that all stakeholders, systems, and authority figures do their bit and ensure that the burden of mental health is reduced to as much extent as possible. In terms of services, in terms of policies, in terms of bills, or even systemic guidelines that are present, it's important that we take care of the individuals wherever they are, whether at school, in college, at the workplace, or even at home. Right? As much as mental health needs to become a talk from home to home, it also needs to become a talk across institutions, because keeping in mind the rate at which mental health burden is only sadly rising, along with the suicide rates having increased over the years also, it is important that we take care of our people wherever they are. Most often, we spend maximum number of our hours outside of home, and that's how it makes it a responsibility of systems outside of home to also do their bit to ensure that people are taken care of. So I think this has to be divided and decentralized at the national, state, district, and local levels also, where every system comes up to take onus responsibility to take care of its people in whatever best ways possible. I think it is a good news we are hearing more about mental health support at workplaces, mental health leaves. Of course, it's a long way to make its place in workplace policy. I think we're recently also looking at some slow developments in the insurance sector as well. But overall, to put it in a nutshell, I feel that reduction of mental health burden and suicide prevention is everyone's business, right? And as we recognize that the mental health burden is only increasing, I hope that we all come together to do our own bit that we can to support not just our own mental health, but the mental health of people around us as well.
So, as we come to the end of the episode, is there any message that you'd leave for our listeners for this podcast?
I think one thing that I would like to leave with all of us listening to this podcast is that mental health is important, and it's important that we take care of our own health first. It's important and it's okay to talk about when you are not okay. These are small reminders that we can give ourselves to make sure that we are taking care of our own health before we're actually there for someone. Also, I think in increasing another thing, as the question keeps coming up, as we talk about empathy, compassion, being there for someone, supporting someone, it's important that we are also mindful of our own capacity of what we can do and what we cannot do. So if we can just listen, we can just listen. If we can provide support, we should do that. And if we can't, we can make an effort to connect someone who is in need of help or is in distress with a reliable professional or a reliable resource where they can find the help that they need.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lodha. It was really an insightful session. And thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And I hope everybody will watch and also be aware of this situation. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joyeeta, and the entire team for doing this podcast. And I think once again, I'll just leave this message that please take care of your mental health. It's okay to talk when you are not okay.